Hi, Becky Christopherson, Violin Guru. Thank you so much for buying my videos. I hope they're everything you hope for and more. And of course, please feel free to reach out to me on the Facebook group with any questions you might have or with videos. So the first several videos are meant to be the first couple of lessons all put together. And I broke them into smaller videos so that it's easier to find your starting place. So if you're a brand new beginner, or you feel like you never properly understood things, just start with this video. If you already kind of know the parts of the violin and general maintenance, then you can go on to the next video, which is how to hold the bow and place the left hand. So starting with the parts of the instrument. From the bottom, we have a chin rest. I prefer to call it a jaw rest, but we'll talk about that more in the next video. And then there's a tailpiece. The tailpiece is attached by tail gut that goes around the button. These two metal bars and that are part of the chin rest. And in the chin rest, you should see a little bit of cork underneath your chin rest, protecting the violin from it. And there should be a little bit of cork here as well, or some sort of material, so that the metal isn't right on the violin. If this is a little loose, you can take a pen and put it in one of those little holes and just tighten it, or a very, very small screwdriver. And if they've come out, you can just pop them in there and then tighten that. So here's your tailpiece. Here we have the fine tuners, which are meant to help tune your instrument when it's just a little bit out of tune. And then we have the bridge. The bridge should be in an arc. And the E string end of the arc is often slightly lower than the G string end, but the G string end should never be lower than the E string end. You can see on my bridge they're fairly even, and that's fine. So the thinnest string is your E string, it's the highest. Then you have the A string, and the D string, and then the G string, the lowest and the fattest. Underneath the strings is the fingerboard, that black piece. Then you have F holes where the sound comes out. And if you look through one of the F holes and kind of angle your violin, you'll see a post in the middle. That's a sound post, and it's a very integral part of sound production. So if it falls over, you have a major problem, and you need to go to a professional shop and have them help you with it. But generally it won't, unless the violin has some kind of trauma, or if the bridge is removed from the violin for a long period of time, because in part it's the pressure of the strings on the bridge on the violin that hold the sound post in place. So the bridge is not attached with glue. It's just the pressure of the strings. So if the bridge pops out, we will talk about how to put it back, but please don't use glue. So the front of the violin, the sides, and the back. The black line that goes around the edge is called the purfling. Then here we have the neck. Then there's the nut, which is just that little bar across the top there. It's part of the fingerboard. You have 4 pegs for the strings for when it's really out of tune. And to see how to tune the instrument, check out the video unboxing your violin. And then this is the scroll. And the scroll can be highly stylized or not. It does not matter. It does not affect the sound of the instrument. It's just a little artistic license that violin makers take some time. Then you'll also need some sort of shoulder support. There are violinists that don't play with any kind of shoulder support, and I prefer it sometimes, but for a beginner, I would really not recommend it. You can use a shaped sponge. A size 5 is big enough, or a 6 is big enough for a full-size instrument, and it should be big enough to go all the way across. This is a Kuhn shoulder rest, which I like because it's shaped, and it's just adjustable enough. It rotates so it can fit my shoulder. And then you can experiment. I like to put mine exactly across the back, but other people, depending on their shoulders, might like it somewhat angled that way. or the other way. You'll just have to play with it until you find what works for your body. So I'm going to put it back now. The feet sometimes wear away, or they lose the elasticity that loses its stickiness, and you can buy new feet without having to replace the whole shoulder rest. And there are tons of options, but for a beginner, I would really just recommend a shaped sponge, which you can get on the internet or in most violin stores, or a Kuhn shoulder rest, which is slightly adjustable and molded for the shoulder. And if those two options don't work for you, then you can go broke trying to buy everything else that's available and figure it out. Also, the chin rest, you're not married to that either. So if you play for a few months, 6 months, a year, or whatever, and you just can't get comfortable, there are other chin rest options that might help you be more comfortable, particularly if you're left eye dominant. So those are the parts of the violin. I'm just going to get my bow real quick. So the bow, there's a screw here, and that affects the tension in the stick as well as the hair. So when it's not being played with, you want to turn the screw towards you and loosen it. So now you see my hair is loose, and you also see that there's a big curve in my stick. So that allows it to rest, which is really important. Then when I need to play, I'm going to turn the screw away from me, but I'm only going to turn it just enough so that the hair is not loose, but the stick still has some curve in it. You don't want to go all the way straight. You will warp your bow and ruin it. So it only has to be just enough. If your pinky fits in like so, that's perfect. No more than that. Okay, so this is the frog. This is where we hold it. This is the grip. This is the wrapping. You may just have a grip, or you may have a grip and a wrapping. It does not matter at all. This is the clip, and it's behind this that the bow hair is tied in there. This is horsehair typically, or it can be synthetic. And this, of course, is wood, or it can be carbon fiber. This is the stick. And then we have the tip. What used to be ivory, which is now plastic, but on older bows is still ivory. And here again, the bow hair is merely tied behind the tip there. So if you break horsehairs, which happens all the time, don't worry about it, you have a lot. If you break a horsehair, please don't rip it out. Get scissors and cut it close, because if you rip it out with too much force or the wrong angle, you can actually rip out the knot that's holding the horsehair and break the whole thing at either the tip or the frog. So please don't just rip it. You'll see professionals rip it. We do it all the time. But you really have to kind of get the feel for it. And even then, you should put your thumb as a barrier so that you don't just rip it all out. So those are the parts of the bow. The bow also requires rosin. If you have a brand new bow, it's going to be super slippery. And again, I covered this in the unboxing the violin, but I'll go over it again. So typically, about 6 times up and down will do the trick. You can hear me rosining. I'm doing it very strong. If you just do that, you're not going to get any rosin. You actually have to rub the rosin. This is called a cake. So you have to rub the rosin off the cake onto your horsehair. And then also, as you play, the rosin does kind of build up in your bow hair, which is good for the most part until it builds up too much, but it takes a lot for that to happen, so don't worry about it. So a new horsehair needs a ton of rosin because there's nothing there. And then as you rosin it, 5 or 6 times will do for the most part. And you should rosin every 1 to 2 hours worth of playing. And that the rosin wears off after that. Now when you play, the rosin wears off and it goes on the strings. So you also need a cleaning cloth. Any cotton cloth that doesn't have oils on it is great. Even an old t-shirt, you can just cut it up. And when you're done playing, you need to wipe off the strings. They will squeak, but if you put your fingers across the strings really strong, you can mitigate that a little bit. You also want to wipe the wood under the strings, and on the other side of the bridge, under the bridge as much as you can get to it, and even under the fingerboard, because that rosin is dust when it plays and it goes everywhere. And you don't want it building up on your instrument because this is just wood grain, and that rosin will get stuck in the wood grain and it will ultimately deaden the sound of your instrument. Because when you play, the whole instrument vibrates. It's a little harder to feel in the violin, but when I teach the cellists, like their whole body vibrates the first time they play an open string with a bow, and it's just so cool. So if you have that rosin building up in the wood grain, then it's like putting your hand over its mouth and muffling the sound. So you really want to keep it clean. And every now and then it's a good idea to do the stick of the bow, just to keep it nice, take care of it. Like that. And of course, if I was putting my instrument away now, which it feels like I'm gonna do because I'm wiping it clean, then I would loosen the screw and let the bow hair and the stick relax before I put it away. When you put it away, it is super important to remove the shoulder rest, because when you close the violin case, that bridge is the highest part of the violin. And so when you close the case, if it's elevated because of the shoulder rest, even if it's only a sponge, you really run the risk of crushing that bridge. So you got to take it off and put it back on again every time you put it away. Okay, it's for safety reasons. And then always make sure that you completely lock up your case. Well, don't lock it actually, but if it's zippered, do the zipper all the way around. You want to protect your instrument from cold and from heat. So it's really not a good idea to leave it out in between practices unless you're in a very temperate climate. If it's cold, it will dry out the wood and it will crack. And if it's very hot, the varnish can actually melt. So you want to keep your violin happy. So those are the parts of the instrument. And for tuning, I would refer you to the Unboxing the Violin. The easiest thing is to get an app for your device. They're free. Just search for tuner, and the app can show you whether you're in tune or not and what you need to do to make yourself in tune. And again, if you have a new violin, it's going to go out of tune a lot, which is going to be annoying. But don't despair, because eventually it will learn. And the strings will stretch, and your violin will stay mostly in tune most of the time. Again, as long as you keep it in even temperature. I forgot to mention the other thing that cold does is the pegs shrink, just like your fingers, right? When they get cold, your rings might get loose. So the pegs shrink, and so if your violin gets cold, they will shrink and they will slip. And it will look like your violin exploded because all of your strings will be so loose. And if it gets too hot, they will swell and they will be very difficult to turn. So keep your violin in a temperate climate, put it away. If you live in a very cold, dry climate, you might want to get a little dehumidifier, humidifier, that you can put in the F-hole when it's away in the case. It has a sponge inside that you keep moist to keep the instrument from drying out. So that is the care and feeding of your instrument. And now in the next video, we'll talk about how to hold